Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is What's Hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner.
Welcome everyone to our fourth week of talking about field service. We have our fourth awesome guest. Really excited to introduce Adam Hallbeck to everybody, who is a pre-sales architect. Adam, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, how you got into Dynamics?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ashley. Adam Hallbeck, pre-sales architect, work for a local partner here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, so Upper Midwest, and had previously worked for another local partner with the likes of Liz and Merlin way back when. So is it too cliche to say that I fell into it? I feel like that's a pretty common thread out there in the channel, so way before anything CRM, like before sniffing around relational databases or anything, I had started at a kind of like a boutique recruiting firm. That might be a little generous though. And I had a very good friend there. His name was Sean, and he ended up coming over to that, that other partner. So started at Power Objects, and he started feeding me information on, the culture is great, the people are awesome, the technology is really cool, and I was pretty hype on it. So decided to talk with the team. Just at the time, coincidentally, they were looking for somebody to jump in and build the team, help recruit, and bolster the delivery chops a little bit. And it was between delivery folks, education, support, et cetera. But I went, this is such an awesome company, and started in an HR and recruiting capacity. But when I started, jumped full force. So I had the opportunity to jump full force into Dynamic CRM. And at the time it was, if you remember 2011 days, like 2013 was, I think it had just been released. And, this is really when the cloud was still, online was still, we were buzzing about that, and everybody and their cousins were migrating, going dark to cloud and everything. So that energy, coupled with the fact that we were tracking our candidates and jobs and openings and everything, all of our, it was power, it was a system to track all of our HR folks, as well as all of our training, certifications, skill sets, and things like that internally. And I had a hand in designing some of that front end of our candidates, of the people coming through the door. And I went, yeah, this is really cool stuff. Like, this is really neat, and I think I can do this. So I was in an HR box for a little while, but then I transitioned to a team that was more, out of the box, got to get really creative with out of the box. It was a subscription service model, and got to pop the hood, get my hands dirty, kept falling in love with all the technology, and then went on to enterprise healthcare, another partner. Now I'm kind of living in a sales box where I had historically been focused on delivery and projects and everything. So fell into it. A lot of stuff happened, kept falling in love with what Microsoft was doing, and here we are.
I think that's interesting that you come from the HR space, because I think a lot of people, I fell in from marketing. I think Liz, maybe you were in sales. So I think that's like a completely different avenue to fall into, like just the place of using Dynamics and then falling in love with it, like we all have.
I think it just shows,
yeah, my family, like my parents were really confused, because I I was hell-bent on being like a physics major in college, and then I flipped the script completely and went philosophy, and that was a red flag for mom. But after after that, it was the recession still was sort of lingering around, and you had to kind of take what you got. So this whole trajectory from what are you doing in college to what are you doing with your life, which is, I think, valid at the time, and then jumping into more of an HR, box, and then embracing technology and going the technology path. Yeah, my parents were scratching their heads for a while and had no idea what CRM or any of this stuff was, so they were a little confused. But it all came together after a while.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it like the variety of backgrounds or the different ways that people like accidentally get into the industry just like proves the value of prior experience, even if it's not directly related, or that you can have, any sort of background or educational background and still be a good fit, that you don't have to follow that like traditional computer science developer path if that's not what you have.
100%. And I like, funny enough, like jumping into like more of a delivery capacity, getting hands-on with the technology, being a trusted advisor, et cetera. One of the biggest things, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I got from, colleagues, friends, et cetera, was workflows. You might have to sort of understand the, a little bit more of the nuance to automation within the system. Funny enough, philosophy set me up pretty well for that with first order logic, so like Boolean operators and logical consequences and nested actions and all that, all the actual, like the structure of automation and how it should properly be set up. That was more of a breeze than some of even like the UI pieces. So it was interesting. It was interesting.
That's crazy to me. I was going to ask you what you were planning to do with the philosophy degree.
Think really hard about why I didn't have a job.
Nice.
Like, I don't.
But that's crazy to hear.
It all worked out. We're good.
I know, that's crazy to think though, that, I mean, that's not at all tied to technology, right? Philosophy. And so that still helped you. And like, that's insane.
Really helped with critical thinking, breaking down, systems thinking. So complex problems to, what is our goal, A to B, and building around that. So finding efficiencies and breaking things down into simpler bite-sized chunks. And that was really, really beneficial, helpful to jump into more of the, if you want to call it like the softer pieces of, like pure business analysis, and snapping all the puzzle pieces together with like solution and systems architecture, data architecture. So it was actually more of a boon than I'd realized or thought about.
So all you philosophy majors out there, go into consulting. It's a perfect fit.
Do it. Yep. We all love to hear ourselves talk anyway, so it's a really good gig.
Right. That's why you got to end up in sales.
Oh, hey, that was the natural progression, right?
Mm-hmm.
Recruiting, sales, they're similar.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. So I hear, and I don't mean to lead the witness or anything, but I hear field service might be on deck for our conversation today.
I was actually just going to ask a question about field service. So yes, field service is in our conversation for today. So I was curious, and I asked this question for one of our other guests. And when we were talking with Kyle Young from Microsoft, he had mentioned that Microsoft's working a lot on kind of the ease of standing field service up so that you don't have to spend quite as much time to get it going out of the box. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts are, since we're talking about kind of field service for smaller organizations. How large of a team is the right size, do you think, to jump into field service? Like how many field techs do you need to have for it to make financial sense to implement actual field service?
That's a really awesome question. So, and it's a tough one to answer because the approach that I'm taking these days is a little different based on the industry, customer, et cetera. But I've heard a fair split is, and I don't know what you all have heard, but like 50 to 75 people, dispatched techs. So, north of 50, north of 75, maybe closing in on 100, might have like a subcontractor split in there too. So not all like direct employees, but reaching out to third parties and having subs in the mix too. So I've heard 50-ish, 75-ish, from a pure technician perspective. But it's becoming so much more accessible to smaller teams like in SMB. And I think Kyle even hit on this in your last session, which was this, some of the we just yesterday had our CRMUG, local chapter meeting here, and we talked about a guided setup to configure your frontline workers. So there are some support systems, even in provisioning your environments and everything. It's an easier access point. I've heard 50, 75, but a lot of my conversations lately have actually been focused around, okay, what is the composition of your team that can support this kind of implementation? What are the actual needs and requirements? If we need 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 primary marquee features from field service day one with a rollout, it makes sense to look that way. But if we're sort of isolating or focusing on maybe just inspections, or maybe simply getting a field tech from point A to point B with some customer information, we have a lot of options in our back pocket to be able to streamline and automate end-to-end that process without having to bite off much more than we can chew with field service. Merlin, in that last interview with Kyle, you had brought up, there are so many tables, like there's so much that's
There's a
in there.
lot.
So navigating that can be quite a challenge, if you're a lighter, leaner team. So it's less of, these days for me anyway, in discovery and trying to size things up, then the sheer number of technicians does play a factor. But because of those accessibility factors, because of what we're hearing in the channel, the roadmap, and the emphasis on biz apps for our customers, there is a little bit more support, and we can really fine tune what that implementation might look like. Should we be looking at full D365 field service, to maybe isolate to core work order intake, work order to dispatch, so it's it's a little different case by case, we'll say, not just hinging, not just dependent on a tech count, if that makes sense.
So
That does make
Adam,
sense.
if you decide like field service is too much, maybe it's just not a match for the requirements. They don't need all of that like day one, like to your point.
Yeah.
What other options do you consider then in that scenario?
Lots. And so, um, in my project history, the projects I've been a part of or scoped out, had a hand in some sort of cookie jar somewhere. We have use cases along the lines of like inspection-based Canvas apps, so more of a companion app that's rolling data back into the Dataverse, like rolling data back into the system for sales folks or for customer service individuals. But it's a very straightforward point solution companion application that's meant for, specific asset inspections. So that was more of, widgets, devices, assets in the field, very simple use case. Also been a part of scheduling like clinical innovation center resources. I mentioned enterprise healthcare a little while ago. So, it was a unique business unit within the overall enterprise, the offerings and the BUs there. So, scheduling clinicians, different resources to these hub sites, the health systems sites between Wisconsin, Minnesota, other areas. But it was resource scheduling, so a similar theme, something that's often tackled with field service solutions. Property management, facilities reviews, or facility reviews, Kyle brought that up as well. So using more of an XRM take. So that's, I have a lot of history getting creative with that. But in terms of the kind of the sequence progression of what is the lightest of lightweight to what is going to be full-blown field service. The lightest of lightweight I've seen used in a semi-field service sense is actually Power Apps for Teams. So there are a few templates that are out there. One of them is an inspections app. I believe Joel Lindstrom and a few other people at Microsoft worked on that app specifically. So Project Oakdale, was that the code name for
Initially.
Power Platform? Yeah, that's right. So, if it's, I do not want to value prop that as like a full field service solution. Take this with, a few asterisks included here. But if you have very pointed use cases, business cases where it makes sense to do so, and you are keeping an eye on Power Platform, you have yet to fully invest, it might be a really good door to crack open, to start exploring how to build these apps, how to enable folks that might be embracing or invested in Teams as a platform already. But again, that's a very, very lightweight, and that's very specific. If we have more requirements, we have a broader, like the breadth and depth of need requirements, that's where I would then look to probably, an XRM Power Platform build. You can go in blank slate, and develop your data structure, build your front ends, use Power Automate, use other automation integration techniques, but really kind of taking a blank canvas and making it your own. A lot of tech debt. There's a lot of tech debt with that. But that is an option. The kind of the sweet spot though that I've found is building around work streams you already have defined and you're already, users are already adopting. What I'm primarily talking about is, say you're already invested in D365 customer service. We have, if you're at that enterprise level, the enterprise licenses, you have resource scheduling that we can tap into. We've got that ability to schedule anything with, I think the name has changed from universal resource scheduling to just resource scheduling. But using that tried and true and maybe already in flight case intake, case intake and triage process, and then wrapping that resource scheduling around it. So having our named technicians, having our named resources, and being able to route and schedule cases in almost a field service way, using the schedule board, using our resource management capabilities, but not biting off all of that schema and all of those components that come with field service, so scaling and easing into a more advanced scheduling system. So it's a little D365 first party app by way of customer service. It's a little XRM built around that, maybe using some of the modular services and offerings around that. So, really depending on where a team is and how comfortable and how fast they can go and whether we can support that will drive what I propose, what to take a look at, what we can really successfully jump into and manage.
Curious.
I feel like that's
go ahead, Marilyn.
I was just going to say, I feel like that's a good distinction to make sure that you're not building too far out in XRM and then, 2 years down the road, you realize you need full field service. And now I've got my own custom work order entity and I've got to move all my data and kind of do all this stuff. I kind of like that idea. Right. Yeah. I like that idea of sort of stopping at customer service and using that as much as you can and still being able to take advantage of the scheduling. And then once you realize okay, no, I need the rest of this, then you can just light up field service and sort of extend out into that frontier.
Absolutely. And the solution architects and delivery folks that I get to work with, the sort of the mantra I'm throwing out there is build with purpose. So if you do, and this is, I guess, just general advice, if I don't know how many times in the past year I've talked with folks who were so gung-ho about field service, that was the only prize in their eyes. And it took a little finesse and some nuance and some conversation to bring them back a little bit and go, we need to set everybody up for success here. So let's take this path. But if we do take this path, understand that there might be another logical endpoint. There might be that jump to full field service. So if we're doing this, be mindful of how you're building all of the relationship schema, front end, any custom tables, understand what that exit strategy ought to be, understand what that upscale strategy ought to be. So when we need to flip the switch in terms of scheduling, if we need to flip the switch in terms of porting data from a custom table or cases or something to work orders, just know, at least have in the back of your mind what that process looks like and what that data strategy might be.
I think that's a good, I think you mentioned this, but just a good rule of thumb, a good design practice, regardless of if field service is in the mix or not, just planning for the future and keeping that in mind when you're designing your solution.
Absolutely. And one thing that, we're kind of keeping with the Dataverse Power Platform D365 tools, but I'm also in the room a lot these days just because at Stoneridge we have ERP CRM platform. It's many practices, and I'm talking with folks that might be invested in Dynamics GP or Business Central, and there is an avenue here. There are ISV solutions that can lay on top of Business Central. A couple that come to mind are like Key to Act, FieldPoint. If jobs or projects are a part of the mix at all, and costing, we might need to keep an eye for project management solutions there too. But there's a whole ISV ecosystem you can look at as well. So kind of breaking out of the insular Dynamics 365 first party apps conversation, there are options out in App Source. There are options with some of these groups that have been around for quite some time that have pretty solid user experiences and are reasonably priced. So other options too.
Ashley, I think you wanted to ask something earlier.
Honestly, it was the same thing as Merlin, is like thinking about that scalability. Merlin and I were totally on the same page there, because I was curious, like obviously starting, but you already answered this, is just if you're going to start from scratch, you got to consider like at what point do you jump over to field service and how do you align for that? But you already answered. So
absolutely.
Good to know we were all thinking the same thing.
Yeah, and I, to bring it back to the using some of the first party components with build around that, architecture and design around that, like resource scheduling and whatnot. Recently we were just in a project where it was a higher volume of turns, in terms of assets in, assets out. It was essentially building a rental management process with field service was the intent. That was the path that we wanted to go down, and that there was consensus, client side, on the partner side as well. But we get into the mix, we get into the thick of it. As that cone of uncertainty keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller, the architects and we're all going, this probably isn't the solution. So there was a hard pivot a little later in the game, but what we ended up doing was really cool. So the whole business model was disaster response rentals, generators, trucks, rolling stock. If a hurricane blows through, if Texas had the huge ice storm a little while ago, so we need resources for that. So the business model was built on monitoring where these disasters might be taking place, gearing up for those, and then getting assets out into the field, people, like I said, generators, other machines. What ended up happening was we pivoted away from full field service, went D365 sales, but the kind of the crux or the big hinge for the project was we needed to scan a lot of stock. We needed to understand assets where they were point in time. And so we did a lot of that with a Canvas app. We went Power Platform and really housed a lot of that crucial field activity, data tracking, follow-ups, to-dos, all of the data that you need while you're out there getting assets, where whatever they might be, getting them where they need to be, and then understanding not just what's in the field, but on the back end, do we need to fix a truck? Do we need to go into a more of a support break fix model and whatnot? So it actually ended up being a kind of a core CRM, sales and service model with a lot built around that for the field folks, which is pretty cool.
Interesting.
That is kind of nice. And I feel like jumping into the Power Platform and like Canvas apps specifically, I think gives us a lot of that flexibility to build around that we didn't used to have, right? Like, I feel like years ago, it was like, well, if you want a mobile app, like you kind of need to buy something that already provides a mobile app for you, and you have to work within those constraints. And now it's like, well, I can build a mobile app for anything. I just put together a Canvas app and like, here's the 5 fields you need. There's your 5 fields, and I can put them anywhere in Dataverse and call it a day.
Yeah, and I don't know about the team here, but like I haven't come across a project where I can't think of one right here right now, but where the Canvas app as the solution was really the focal point of the project itself. A lot of these, like this, I feel like the sweet spot a lot of times for Canvas apps is like what we're talking about now for field resources, highly mobile point solutions, something that is a piece of a broader scope or spectrum of what the heart and soul of that broader solution is. And especially when we're looking at field service, we talked, rental cycles, property management, facility reviews. Think about the power of enabling, equipping your field resources where they haven't been equipped or enabled like this in the past with low code, no code, very quick on-ramp solutions that, we in this last project I mentioned, we proved something out in a few days, and that really led to a lot of get the gears turning a little bit, and seeing the value, realizing the value, and how quickly we can develop these solutions with Power Apps and with Automate and whatever.
Yeah,
it was awesome.
I agree.
It was so cool.
That sounds pretty cool. I like it. throw it on app stores, resell it.
I'll run it up the chain. We'll see. The other thing so just, we're talking about field service Lite solutions, and if we're not going full field service, that's kind of what the conversation's been about. But if we were to go field service, one thing that we've been kind of tackling has been, that accessibility conversation. So we talked a little bit about, Microsoft throwing the guided setup into the Get Started page, some of the new components that are coming with the first party solution. That's great, but from a methodology perspective, from an implementation methodology perspective, something we've been driving is also called a guided setup. So it doesn't have to be this overly complex process where, if you're not doing inventory, rolling, advanced warehousing, if you're not doing return goods, if you're not doing, you don't need inspections, if it really is core work order, dispatching, resource management, route optimization, et cetera, there is an easier inroad these days. And I think finding somebody who's knowledgeable about the product, who understands the ins and outs of each, it's not just field service equals work orders. Well, I just rattled off like 3 or 4 other primary work streams: returns, purchasing, and POs, and all these other pieces. If it is a leaner need, field service, I don't want to discount it. We're talking field service Lite and other options and alternatives, but if you find the right resources, or if you want to ramp up internal learning and competencies too, there is an avenue for SMB organizations to use field service proper. Just do a lot of pre-planning, make sure you're ahead of the curve when it comes to what you're jumping into, what you're getting into, what those complexities are. And I will say that if integrations are a part of it at all in terms of downstream billing, various billing models, different logic that would be required if we're tying to a back office application, that, then it's going to get a little hairy. But, there is a place for D365 field service for the SMB market. Just got to be done the right way.
I'm curious about the accelerators, and if you think that also helps enhance the ability for SMB companies to use field service.
Accelerators, like industry accelerators?
Yep, industry accelerators. Kyle had talked about that, so I was just curious if that makes it, because it's more out of the box, and if that more it makes it easier for people to stand it up.
I don't know if I'm familiar with any field service specific accelerators that are like, is this built on top of field service, the first party app?
Yep, I think that's what Kyle said, right? Am I misunderstanding what Kyle said?
I believe that's the idea. I'm not sure. I don't know if he said that in context of there are already, or that this is an area of growth in the roadmap. Like, someday they may have an industry accelerator for, like, I don't know, HVAC, like mechanical service organization. And that might be a way to stand it up faster.
I haven't myself been hands-on with any, like, HVAC as an example. I haven't seen myself any accelerators that build on top of that schema or build on top of the solution. I know Microsoft was just digging through a bunch of marketing assets and artifacts yesterday. They have a list of ISVs that are for, webinar integration and a few other like processes and automation pieces that are built on top of or in partnership with these other organizations, built specifically for D365 marketing. I myself haven't seen anything for field service specifically. I have to imagine there are a few out there built by partners, independent parties, whatnot, but the add-ons and accelerators that I've seen are more, we talked about those ISVs. So for, like Business Central, if we're not really looking at D365 field service on that side of the fence.
Sure, that makes sense. I think we're probably getting close on our time here, so we have to ask the standard question, as we are the Dynamics Hot Dish. The obligatory question is, what is your favorite hot dish? And since you're a local boy, I know you know what that means.
Am I like, is it bad or wrong if I don't say tater tot hot dish? Like, no, I feel like that's...
choose whatever you want. I want you to choose.
That's too cliche.
Yeah, that's another. The two big cliches here. You know, I fell into it. Tater tot hot dish. No, I think my go-to, and I was just talking about this with my wife not too long ago, but we tend to make for Thanksgiving. It's a complex recipe. It actually takes quite a while to put together. It's Velveeta and broccoli, and that's about it. Like, cheesy broccoli for Thanksgiving. So Velveeta, broccoli, and then some crispy onions on top of it, and bake that sucker up. That's about it.
It's kind of like a green bean casserole, but different.
Yeah, a little, but with Velveeta. So
right,
keeping it classy.
Not as classy. Adam, you are the first person to say tater tot hot dish as an answer at all, so I don't think it's cliche.
Really?
No.
Well,
really? Okay.
We don't have too many native Minnesotans, so I feel like
it's a tie. Then we'll say if I had to pick one, it would be the super classy Velveeta and broccoli. But tater tot hot dish is, in almost any variety I've had, is chef's kiss.
That's what I wanted to ask. Do you like vegetables in your tater tot hot dish?
But only because if I don't include them, I'll feel really guilty about myself. Like
what do you put in it? Like
scoop up
peas
the
or
Velveeta
corn?
with my hand. No. Peas, not corn myself, but yeah, peas are I think the go-to. Yeah. So if I don't see green in there, I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna eat it anyway, but I'll feel a little guiltier.
Potatoes are good for you though. So it's like the tater tots are healthy is the way I look at it.
Right. The tater tot healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. They are. Yeah.
I think probably on that bombshell, we should wrap it up for today. Thanks, Adam, for joining us.
Well, I gotta say, team, I really appreciate you bringing me on. It's always fun to see you all, and something that I'm passionate about. So thank you, and maybe one day we'll double back and do it again.
Yeah, I hope so.
Let's hope.
Thank you.
All right, cool. Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at dynamicshotdish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.